Okay, so here we have Dads and the Path for Dads. Now this song was sort of infamous. It was definitely more of a notes-based song than a path-based song. Normally if you're the person that hit the most notes, you're the one that won the song. So your path, although it mattered, it didn't matter so much, not as much as an extent as a song like The Sentinel or Farmer Says, something like that. Definitely more about hitting the notes. But it did have an optimal path, believe it or not, and so we're going to look at it right now. So, our first activation. We have this easy tap note stuff to begin with the song, and we want to get pretty much enough whammy from these two phrases to have 3/4 bar by the end of this second phrase, because then we get another phrase and we should end up with full bar after this last phrase. And then we're just holding on for full bar until the next phrase. And it says to activate on the blue note to squeeze it in, but I didn't bother. Obviously it's just a lot easier to activate on this green note here because it's on a measure, and you know, it's just easier in every way really, and you probably end up ending at the same point because you're on full bar. The only difference is you wouldn't be able to squeeze in this open note rather than squeezing this blue. But obviously this song didn't come down to who can squeeze. Wasn't a squiz off or anything like that. So yeah, better to activate right here on the measure in terms of just being consistent. Also we have an overlap here that's I think fairly tight, so definitely best to activate here rather than here, because missing this overlap will cost quite a lot of points because you're getting just pure 16th triplets throughout this activation. So yeah, the first act is pretty fine to be honest. Second activation, we got one whammy right here, nothing notable about it really, another phrase here, and then the optimal act is acting right here. Now, with this one I went for a tilt activation, and the reason for that was, you see we have this triplet strumming right before it that leads into the did-it. So, although it's definitely possible, because you have a little bit of a break between this one and this one, it's definitely possible for me to get my finger over to the button in time, because I wouldn't have my finger extended during the strumming. Triplet strumming is just a bit too strange for that. So I would have it underneath the strum bar, and that transition I guess is possible, but probably not consistent enough to do it every single time. And using the button, if you miss this, you probably want to activate here, but this screws you over because you'd end up overlapping this phrase, which is something you don't really want to do. So instead I went for a tilt act, so I was tilting pretty much as soon as we got to this first one, and it would end up being somewhere in between here and here, no, not really any later. So a safety act if you will. But I'll reiterate it once more, this one didn't come down to the wire really ever, so perfectly fine. Yeah, and then we have this phrase here, relatively quick set of notes, but not too bad. So yeah, 1, 2 phrases, and then the next activation says to do it right here. I delayed it because this is sort of a very arbitrary spot in this like section that's very similar all the way throughout. Instead I just delayed it to the next phrase. So it's on a measure, it's on a star power phrase, you can't miss where the activation point is, and I don't think it would cost you that many points. You have this bit that's triplets instead of what is basically 16ths with, although there are some triplets, but the entire measure isn't 16th triplets over here. So I don't think you would lose that many points, but you definitely lose some points. But that's just the price you pay for having an easier activation spot. So yeah, right here I went for. Now this phrase I didn't whammy at all, and the reason for that is because I'm just tapping the entire time, and I don't want to force myself to teleport. It's just to get these whammies in an activation that, you know, it matters, but it's worth just being more consistent for me hitting these notes. So I opted not to whammy any of it and just prepare for the tapping instead. So yeah, no whammying this phrase. This phrase perfectly fine, this phrase fine, and immediately after this phrase we have an immediate act. So right here, it's a yellow strum. Easy enough to remember. It's at the fast part, if you will, the fast part before the triplet strumming. So fairly easy to remember immediately. Don't tap this part anyway, so nothing wrong with that. No danger of overlapping if we activate right here. So we have this phrase and this phrase, which you owe me a bit. Excuse me. And then as far as this last activation goes, I actually didn't remember where it was at all. All I would do was basically just wait until this phrase finished, and then just wing it, like maybe activate. It would be anywhere from like here to here. I would normally want to try to activate before this double chord here, because that's, I don't know, worth the most points in the least amount of time. So yeah, just somewhere around here, and then it would end before the song ended, so, you know, maybe losing 400 points, one chord, not the end of the world. But yeah, 643k was the score. I don't know what score I was getting. I actually never have seen this in practice or in the tournament, so I don't have a baseline score of what this path alteration gave me, but we will find out. And yeah, we'll move on to what is the most interesting part of this song, the notes of it. So we'll get over there. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the notes for dads. Now this one, most players I think found this one to be the hardest of Pool 2. For me personally, it's the hardest of Pool 1 and 2, and one of the hardest of all three pools of songs. So yeah, there's going to be a fair amount to say about this one. The one thing is that a lot of sections repeat, but the absolute hardest ones don't repeat. But either way, we'll get into it. There is nothing to say before Bridge Solo 1 into Dad's, like, what are these sections names though? So, the bit before this, the riffs of Saturn, those bits are pretty fine, it's just relatively quick fretting, but nothing that has any I can say anything about really. So Bridge Solo 1. Okay, so pretty quick all the way through there. I think the majority, well, the strumming is obviously in its triplets, which is relatively awkward, and then the fretting part might be in 30 seconds or 16s. I guess it would be, oh, I would check right now. Yeah, that's got to be 30 seconds. So the way I do this, I tackle this bit, it's one-handed, just because of the transition into the strumming. And what I do, I shift into third position to start it off. And I never use my pinky in the entire thing. Because it's really fast and most of it's just at like triplets basically. So it's a case of changing your position and doing descending triplets with these three fingers. And there is the one bit that's like just two notes there, like directly in the middle. But it's the same thing, you're ranking red and hitting yellow. And to do it while speaking is not as easy. And this is one of the hardest parts for me. Right, and as far as the transition into the strumming goes, it's just a red sliding down to the green. And I wouldn't obviously one finger the whole strumming bit, but this is still quite awkward for me, this part. I'm not sure why I missed there. And as far as the strumming itself goes, you're basically looking to anchor, well not anchor, accent every sixth note, so every other set of three. So you see it's green, red, yellow, blue there, so you'd be accenting the greens and accenting the first yellow. But even then it's so fast you might not end up accenting, but that's just how you think about it. Rather than thinking about like every single set of three shifting between downs and ups. And you can just strum through it, to be fair, because it is Clone Hero. But best to like actually try and do it in threes. So that's the first fast part. Next part that's worth mentioning is not actually this part itself, but this transitions into the next section, so it's definitely worth setting one right here. So I'm going to set it here. And this is the main fast part that looks a bit stupid. And for all intents and purposes it is stupid. But I'll break it down after doing it. Okay. So we'll just break that down. Actually, I'll slow it down. So, as soon as I hit those two chords and I do this descending bit, I'm going to get my hand ready to tap. So I'm going to be tapping here. And we can see what I'm going to be doing. It's a bit like the part in immediate results. So, I'm just going to be tapping the blue and yellow here. So, that's the gist of that very first bit. All in first position. I'm just tapping the highest note, and then I obviously have some ladders there. So, standard tapping for now. All in first. Right, at this point where there's two of these ascending quads in a row, just one hand those two because it makes the transition into these ladders a lot nicer. So pretend we hit them. And then what we're going to do after we hit that second quad, we're going to be anchoring green. And then the method for these ladders is literally, so with this hand, tapping hand, orange yellow, then fretting hand, blue red, so da da, and then literally just yellow blue, yellow red, sorry, so da 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 da. And this is a pattern that happens in a lot of these Buried Alive songs or Rings of Saturn songs. Then standard tapping this, and then shifting to one-handed for these last strum notes here. So yeah, standard in first, one-handing these ladders down, back to standard tapping for this little bit, one-handed here, and then that's the whole thing. So there's a lot going on there. Obviously it's just muscle memory. Excuse me, what the finger got in the way? I'm not sure where that's missing. And once more for a good look. Okay, so that's that part. That's the first weird part. Hopefully it made sense. So then we have this section, which I'm just going to talk about really quick. These transitions from the yellow to the chords. You could do this whole part like in first position, but at least doing these blue yellows to the chords using the pinky for me is a little bit awkward, so I opt to just do a middle finger slide to the red into these chords. And I'm sorry for sniffling so much, but cats make me sneeze. So it's a middle to red slide every time. So that's just a little thing about that. Okay, next thing to talk about is the solo, and this is actually the last thing to talk about. So there's not as much as you would think to talk about here because a lot of it's repeated. But the hard parts are hard enough that it makes the whole song pretty difficult. So I'll play through it once. And this part can be inconsistent with the method I use anyway. Yeah, proof that it works. So, we start off with this basic trill,
So there's nothing really to say there. We just hit it like a trill. I just standard tap it. And then we get these mini trills, and I standard tap these as well. So specifically, one yellow, and the rhythm is da 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 da. And then as far as these hammer-ons go, I either standard tap them or one-hand them out. Just depends on how I'm feeling. Doesn't really matter. And once again, this is all in first position to stop any position shifts. It's just standard tapped. Easy enough. Just relatively quick tapping is all it is. Right, and then this is all one-handing, and I'll set the position to here. Then we have this absolute mess of notes, which is the hardest part of the song. So I'll slow it down, and I'll do my method first. So there's a couple of double taps in there. There's no double one-handing, but there are double taps. So, provided you know how to tap ladders, and also like downhill ladders, so ascending and descending ladders. I'll just go through it, explain it like this. So we start off with a double tap, and then hit the ladders downwards as if it was normal ladders. So starting off with a double tap, blue orange, like this. Okay. And then after the first four, we do basically, it's another double tap, so it goes double tap, single, da-da. So we're only using our fretting hand for one of the first five, like bits. I really don't know what I call them. But yeah, so double tap, fret, tap, tap, and then on this second tap, we're just doing a regular ladder down. So this first half. And then the slow ladders up are literally just that. I just play them as they are, just to keep my bearings. And I guess at the very bottom, it's a double tap at the end. A double one hand, should I say. I don't know why I said there was no double one handing, because there is double one handing. Alright, and this one starts off the same way, but double one hand and just regular ladder up. Double tap, double one hand, double tap, double one hand. Okay, so that's how that part's done. And the entire time the green's anchored. And at full speed, this has big potential in this. Just like that. If you're not completely perfect with what essentially are your zigs, it might eat a note. But this is at least a consistent way and pretty much getting a -1. Or SC. SC as I miss more than one note. Alright, so that's how I hit the solo part of Dads and the full solo and everything else. And that's all there really is to say about Dads. The parts that are hard, but everything else is pretty much self-explanatory and there's no reason why I'd miss it. But I would say a good 50 to 60% of the song is missable, which is a big reason why a lot of people banned it. I banned it at least in the first match, or did I? I'm not sure if I banned it or Nick banned it. Someone banned it. But yeah. Anyway, we'll do a run of the song now. Okay, so that was Dad's 634k, almost 635. I don't remember what it said optimal was. I think it was in the 640s. So this path wasn't exact. I know my last activation, or my second last activation in particular, because it doesn't have any whammy, loses quite a lot of points there. But as I said, this song mainly came down to hitting the notes rather than, you know, the pathing itself. So anyway, this is good enough as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, the next song is the last song of Pool 2, and it is The Temple of Hate.